Abram Korn was 16 years of age, living in Poland, when the Nazis invaded his hometown on September 1st, 1939, and World War II began. Abe's life would never be the same. After 6.5 years of experiencing unimaginable terror, forced labor, beatings, being left for dead, dehumanization, starvation, and witnessing mass killings and the horrific aftermath, Abe was finally set free by American soldiers on April 11th, 1945. After the nightmare of living and surviving in multiple ghettos and concentration camps, this Polish Jew married a German Lutheran, and they moved to the United States and made a wonderful life and produced an incredible family. You talk about the American dream. Abe's story is a detailed account of his experience, but it is much more than that. It is a story of genuine faith, overcoming evil with kindness, mixing in a little shrewdness, and being grateful for life and family. In 1969, Abe Korn began writing his story. He died in 1972 at 49 years of age, just as he finished his writings. Over 20 years later, his oldest son, Joe, resurrected the manuscript, edited it, and published it a few years later in 1995 as Abe's Story, a Holocaust memoir by Abram Korn and Joseph Korn. My guest today is Helen Bissell. You will quickly realize that she has intimate knowledge of this story. You will also see that she is a gifted communicator and has given presentations about Abe's story to various groups for over 20 years. Be sure to stay to the end because she will also surprise you. In a time of increased anti-Semitism around the world, the timing is perfect to be reminded that Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, portrayed all Jews as subhuman to justify the extermination of 6 million innocent human beings who happened to be Jewish during one of the darkest times of human history. We should never forget. But despite all the evil, Abe's story is spiritually uplifting and inspiring, and you will be very proud to be an American. There's another sentiment I pray that you take from this story. Never again.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. My guest today is Helen Bissell, who you're about to meet. Last week I was on vacation, and a friend of mine, before I went, sent me a book called Abe's Story, and I was absolutely blown away. It was disturbing, it was inspiring, it was scary, but it was also calming. It was sickening, but it was refreshing. In the end, I was proud to be an American. Abram Korn was one remarkable man, not only to go through what he went through and come out alive, but to write all this that happened. What a story. So I've learned that Helen Bissell goes around doing presentations on this book about the Holocaust. So Helen, first, thank you so much for agreeing to get with me and talk about this story and this whole Holocaust experience. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me.
Well, I'm glad to have you. I know I just mentioned you do these presentations on this book. How long have you been doing that? This book came out originally in 1995. Am I right? Is that when it first came out?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So how long have you been doing this?
I've been speaking for 22 years about Abe's story and that whole journey of Abram Korn as a teenage boy.
Wow. Well, you're going to have some people, I think, after we have this conversation, there's going to be listeners wanting to get this book. They may be wanting to get a hold of you to do a presentation, because I sure would like to hear it. We're going to hear some of it today for sure. So I know also it seems that this story is more relevant today than it's ever been. Just talk about the relevancy of Abe's story right now.
Well, with the current situation in the Middle East and the war between Israel and Hamas, which is very unfortunate, but there is such a surge of anti-Semitism around the world, especially here in our country, which is our main concern. There's no place for any prejudice whatsoever, but certainly no place for anti-Semitism. And so many of these people who have turned against Israel or against the Jewish people and are expressing their anti-Semitism, many of them don't really even know why. I think if we asked them personally, they couldn't give a valuable answer as to why they were feeling that way.
I had a guest a few weeks ago on here. He's Jewish and from Israel, and I actually talked to him from Israel. And he was saying the same thing. Some of the protest people are doing, they interview them, and they don't even know why they're protesting, and they don't know what they're protesting. So you're right, for sure.
It's a very important time.
Yeah, very important time, and what a story about Abram Corn. So let's start. Just tell us a little bit about this story.
So Abe Corn lived with his family in Lipno, Poland. It was a small town in Poland, and they were from an esteemed line of Hasidic Jews, and they were very well respected in their community. Mom, dad, he had two younger sisters, and his family owned a lumber yard and a lumber business. And, he helped out, and he was 16 when the story starts. So in 1939, Hitler, who was a brilliant man, but he was a demented man, had an idea to create a master race. And it was a race where he wanted the people to be Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, white, fair-skinned, fair hair and eyes, all of the above, which was just a sick idea anyway. But he wanted to exterminate any person or people, groups of people that didn't fit into that. And the Jewish people were one of those groups. So that's where it starts. Abe's town was bombed by the Nazi Luftwaffe, which is the Nazi Air Force, on September 1st, 1939, which is the first day of World War II.
Yep.
And the Germans came in, and they came to the Jewish homes, and they took away all their belongings. Anything valuable, took away, jewelry, family, personal items, money. I mean, sometimes you hear stories even of fillings, gold fillings from teeth. And they weren't sure what was going to happen. Ultimately, they were taken to their first ghetto. So the Jewish people were forced to wear an emblem, a Jewish star, on their clothing. They had to follow certain rules and laws that were made against them for things they could and could not do. And Abe and his family went with a group into their first ghetto, which was called the Kutno Ghetto, where 2,000 people were basically in a walled-in space, a walled-in property in a building with no furniture, just an empty floor where they had to live. And they were given a ration of food every day, stood in line to pump water, and had an open pit for a latrine. So, they began to get dehydrated and starved and ill, because with urine and feces open, then there were insects and rodents that spread typhus. So disease would ran rampant through this ghetto. And at 16 years old, Abe was the type of young man who somehow within him, whether he was brought up that way, whether it was genetic, he just lived for other people. He lived to serve.
That was obvious all through this book. He was one special guy, no question.
So you saw that as well.
Oh my goodness.
And he would stand in line for hours and pump the water for people who were not strong enough to do it themselves.
Yeah, I know you'll get to this, but he also would hold bread and give it to people when he didn't have any to eat himself.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
He would share his rations of food, and sometimes their food for a whole day might be a raw potato or one piece of stale bread. And he would share it with someone who he thought needed it more than him. Well, brave young man at 17, so he was in this ghetto for a year, and he decided he couldn't do it anymore.
Why don't you define ghetto?
Okay, this may not be an actual definition, but it was a place where they were locked in.
Right.
And they could not leave, and they had no freedoms, and they were rationed food and water. It was not really like a community that you lived in. It was a horrible place.
Right.
With horrible living conditions. If you can imagine an empty warehouse, this was an abandoned sugar factory, an empty warehouse where they lived on a space on a floor in an empty building.
I've seen some of the pictures. It's incredible.
And this was only the beginning. Because
oh yeah.
This is nothing like the living conditions in a concentration camp.
Right.
So Bruce, he decided, as you know, because you've read the book, that he was going to escape, not selfishly just to save himself, but as he wrote in the book, he wanted to save his family. He thought if he could get out of those walls that he would be able to somehow save his family from there, his parents and his sisters. So he and a friend decided, they rounded up a bribe. Somehow one of them had snuck in a watch. They had a watch and some empty sugar sacks that his sisters had knitted into a rug. And they found a Nazi guard who agreed to take a bribe and look the other way for them to escape.
And that would turn out to be something he used a lot of times for the rest of the next 6 years, right?
Yes.
He was able to bribe these guys.
That's right.
He was smart. Yeah.
I call it playing the game.
Sure.
So there's an excerpt in the book, which is very emotional, about his escape. And he writes it, that he many years later could remember it detail, word for word, when his mom hugged him and he said, it was a hug that said go. And it was a hug that said stay. It was a hug that said how much I love you now and forever. Right. It was a hug that said, God, please watch over my only son. I don't know how, as a mother, how she could let him do that. I'm a mother.
Yeah. Wow.
It gets me every time I even read that passage or talk about it. But they let him go, and their escape was successful, and they went to another ghetto. But it was an open ghetto, and they worked for a wage during the day, got to keep a very small wage, and he was buying non-perishable food items, smuggling them through the black market, hoping they were getting back to his family in the previous ghetto. And you know what? He got caught. Mm-hmm. He and another guy got caught, and they were asked who's running this black market. And they wouldn't tell them. They figured we're already in trouble. So why should we tell them who's running the black market system and make it stop? Because then it would be stopped. So they wouldn't tell them. And these two Nazi soldiers made Abe and this other guy run next to a horse-drawn wagon, and they whipped them with the horse whips and laughed.
Yeah, it was brutal. It was brutal reading that book. Wow.
And, we think, how can human beings not only do this to other people, but do it and laugh?
Right.
Enjoy it?
And there was so much of that. That's the first time he got whipped. But my goodness, it was like, I don't even know how to describe what I was reading, this story.
You almost think it's not real.
Right.
when you read it, but it was real.
I'll probably jump ahead of you, but I just want to say it when I'm
No,
thinking.
please do.
When he hugged his mother and she was saying, go and stay, and whatever a mother was thinking, he never saw her again, right? That was it. But to see his family, that was it, right?
That's right. That's right. But he didn't know that.
No, he didn't know it, but he thought it, but he did not know it. But
His entire journey was 5.5 years, from age 16 to 22. And in those 5.5 years, so I just talked to you about 2 ghettos. He went to several other concentration camps where he was a prisoner, a real prisoner, and it was forced to work for the Nazis, work for the Germans. They were a Nazi workforce. And he learned quickly. I mean, he had, clothes, shoes. He had one pair of shoes that he saved from his initial departure, but prisoner uniforms.
sure.
No hygiene really available to him. Being starved, malnourished for 5.5 years was terrible. Beaten.
While he was being starved and beaten, he was determined to be the best worker they had. He gained camaraderie with the enemy because he went over and above to do good at whatever he was doing, right?
That's right. So if you, and I find this in everyday life now, if you treat someone with negativity, they will more than likely treat you back negatively.
True.
Do you find that too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But he was different. So he realized if he fought back against them, they didn't care. They'd just kill him. So he learned, and I just use this phrase over and over again, he learned how to play the game. And he knew, and he wrote this in his book, he knew that what he did would determine his outcome. And it's what he could do for them that would save his life, that would help him to live. So as long as he did what they told him to do, then he would be okay.
Right.
If they hit him, he didn't hit back, because if he did, they'd just kill him.
And he was watching that take place. I mean, he could see what they were doing to everybody else, right?
All around him.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So he did what he needed to do to survive, with his hopeful end result in sight. I say in sight. He never knew when it would be, but that was his goal, to live to see his family again.
And he was wondering if they were alive. He mentioned that several times. Just before we keep going through this story, let's just put a comma here, because I want people to know that he came to the United States. We're going to get there. What a story that is, and his success here and all that happened here in the United States. He wrote this manuscript, and it sat there a long time after he passed away, right?
That's right. But before he even started writing it, I mean, he never talked about it, and it was a big deal just to write the manuscript. He would meet maybe on Tuesday nights, and he had somebody to type. He had the manager under him at their business that was there, and his wife typed. The rabbi came. There was somebody there to correct grammar, because English was not his first language. But he spoke 5 languages. He spoke Polish, he spoke German, he spoke Yiddish, he spoke Hebrew, and then learned English. So he had to tell his story his way, and then people would interpret it and do proper sentence structure and things like that. But he spoke excellent English.
Right.
Once he learned English, the man was brilliant.
But there was a lot of time in here that he wasn't even thinking about coming to the United States. He was trying to figure out how to make it to the next day. And
that's right. That's right.
So go back. I didn't mean to get you off
no, that's
guard,
okay.
because I think people need to know that he wrote this book before he died. And
that's right. One of my favorite parts of his book, of his story, was that at one point he once again bribed to escape from a horrible, horrible, horrible camp where they were constantly beaten and abused and terrible conditions. And I'm from Georgia. You're from Georgia. We don't have terrible winters. But winters in Poland were brutal.
Gosh.
When all you have is one layer of clothing and the same pair of shoes you've been wearing for years. And he bribed to get on another, to escape again, to get on a transport. He used a pair of shoes with leather soles that he had been saving and got out of that camp, a horrible, horrible camp, and was sent. Now, I'm going to back up for a second.
Okay.
Every time he changed camps, ghetto camps, he was sent by cattle car. People crammed in a train car with no seats, just straw on the bottom and opening at the top where the cows would have air.
And starving.
Starving. Maybe a bucket in the corner that they were to use as a toilet.
Right.
Sometimes for days they would travel on these train cars. So on this particular part of the story, he was put on by mistake, but on a passenger train. And then he was delivered to a civilian work camp where German civilians were able to come in and get the prisoners and use them as their workforce. And they would come in and ask for bricklayers or painters or bakers or whatever it might be. And he always raised his hand, but he was never selected. You know, curiously, Bruce, why wasn't he selected? He was only 5'4" tall. Was he 5'4" tall because for whatever this was at this time, 2 or 3 years, he was malnourished and he didn't grow? Was it genetic? Who knows?
Right.
But he wasn't selected. And then there were almost nobody left, and a guy came in, asked for an electrician's helper, and he raised his hand and he was selected. Well, he didn't know anything about being an electrical helper.
Uh-huh.
And the man told him, he said, Abe, I'm going to tell you now, I do not agree with what the Nazis are doing, but I can't speak out against them for fear that not only will they hurt or kill me, but they'll hurt or kill my family. And I can't risk that. But while you're working for me, as long as you treat me with respect, I'm going to treat you with respect. And that's how their relationship started. So the man taught him a trade. So he, taught him to be an electrician's helper. And he fed him. He invited him into his own home and met his family, and he fed him.
I remember that.
And he said he also invited him into his mistress's home to do repairs there. That's when you mentioned humor.
Yeah.
That was really kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
But he worked for this man for 14 months, and he still was a prisoner. He had no freedom. He would come back at night and be in his barracks, and he would always bring food home that this man would say, here, take this back with you, whether it was bread or dried meat or a pastry, and he would always share it with his bunkmates. And his bunkmates would tell him that they never got food from who they worked for. And he found out later that that wasn't the truth. He was sharing his food and they were getting food too and not sharing it. So to tell you, Bruce, a little bit about his character, which you've learned because you've read the book, he found the good in everyone. And he wrote a chapter in his book he entitled Good Germans, because he knew that not every German was bad.
And most people would never have that perspective. I mean,
that's right.
I saw that. It blow you away. He immediately said, this is this group, but he wasn't painting everybody with the same brush.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Just because they were German didn't mean they were bad. Nazi is a different label.
Right, for sure.
He said in his book that in those 14 months, he was able to nourish his body and nourish his soul. And then one day, his boss tells him, we're not working today. We're just going to spend time together as friends. They had a picnic. They rode a bike. He said, I've learned that there's another list coming and that you're going to be transported away. And that was what happened the next day. And he again was put into cattle car, and he arrived after 3 days, I believe, maybe on a cattle car. And he said when the train stopped, he couldn't wait to get off because of the smell in the cattle car of them being so cramped together and filthy. And when they stopped and got off the train car, he said he was met with the most horrible stench he'd ever smelled in his life. And there were Nazi soldiers with bayonets on the ends of their rifles and police dogs on the ends of leashes waiting to attack. And there was an iron arch that said, Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. Auschwitz concentration camp, which is known for that iron arch, work makes you free.
And 1 million Jews died in that camp. Unbelievable. You're listening to Helen Bissell. She's telling this amazing story. It's a book called Abe's Story. It is absolutely incredible. We're going to be right back.
So he was at Auschwitz concentration camp, and they had to go through selection. And often the people that were running the selection were Jewish prisoners themselves that were forced to do this. But they would go and stand in front of someone who took one look at them, like took one look at Abe, and he was told to go links oder rechts, which is left or right. And if you were told to go to the left, then you were going to live. And if you were told to go to the right, you were given a bar of soap and a towel, sent to a communal shower and told to disrobe, and thought you were going in just for a group shower. And they locked them in, the prisoners, and instead of water coming out of the shower heads, it was gas. And they did these mass killings in these showers. I can't imagine it. And so then he had to go to the next place, the next point of selection, where he was given a tattoo on his arm. So there was on the inside of his arm, there was a triangle which told that he was a Jewish prisoner, because the triangle is part of the Jewish star. And he was given a number, 124157, I think. So he was no longer Abe Corn. He was his number, and that's how he was referred to. It was a great insult also to be tattooed for an Orthodox Jew,
Right.
because the Bible talks about the body as a temple in the Old Testament, and you just didn't get tattoos.
Right.
So that was difficult within itself. So then he was given a prison uniform, and that's what he had to wear. So I say they called Auschwitz a work camp, but Auschwitz was a death camp.
For sure. For sure.
The average prisoner survived 8 weeks at Auschwitz concentration camp. Abe Corn was there for 18 months. Bruce, why do you think, I don't know there's no right answer. I don't know the answer to this question, but why do you think he beat the odds?
I believe it was providence of God. I don't know how else you could answer it. I know it had to do with what he was doing, but
That's right.
God had to have his hand on him.
I think that his faith helped him to persevere, which goes along with what you're saying, that God did that. God wanted him to make it through.
Right.
It couldn't have hurt that he was nourished for the previous 14 months.
Right. That saved his life. Just that 14 months he spent with that boss or family or whatever.
That's right.
That got him back to a little bit of semblance of health. Right.
Right. Mental and physical.
Right.
So I think his faith in God and God's, like you said, providence, his a little bit, where he was nourished mentally and physically, and he just, again, played the game. So we started the story September 1st, 1939, right?
Right.
Fast forward, Auschwitz, January 1945. The Russian front was nearing, and the Germans knew that they had to get the evidence of what they had been doing. I say Germans, the Nazis.
Right.
Had to get the evidence out of Auschwitz. So they started on one of many from different camps around. They started a death march. If the prisoners were strong enough, they were taken on this death march. Any others were left behind, and the bodies were burned. That's what they did at Auschwitz. The smell that Abe smelled when he got off of that train 18 months before, whenever it was, 18 months
Right.
before. I don't think it was January. But the stench was burning bodies from a crematorium.
Yeah, they were stacked up. Bodies were stacked up and ashes were stacked up. I think I read.
Right.
Yeah,
The
right.
bodies were stacked up, he wrote, like cordwood.
I can't imagine that part of it, how he endured seeing that and knowing that that was a really good chance that he'd be part of that group, seeing the deaths and the bodies, and that just blew me away, just how he survived that mentally.
And I think he just somehow, he was very smart.
Right.
He was very smart, so that helped. And he played, again, he
And
played the
he
game.
was shrewd. He was shrewd, too.
That's right.
Yeah.
He did whatever he needed to do to survive because he was determined that if his family was still alive, he was going to reunite with them. But he wanted to live. He just wanted to live. And he always helped others. So on this death march, which was 180 miles, 45 days long,
Walking. Right.
walking through snow, through ice, in prison uniforms.
That's when he got gangrene in the foot and all that, right?
That's right. That's right. They were sleeping in fields. Could you imagine being a German and seeing they were forced to march 5 across, 2,000 people? And what if you looked out your window and saw lines of prisoners walking?
The way I understood it in the book, these regular Germans had no idea all that was going on, that they had to be shocked when
That's right.
when they saw it. I mean, they were keeping that from the other Germans, right?
That's exactly right. There had to have been some that knew
Sure.
in some of the towns where there were camps.
Sure.
But I think a lot of people didn't know or didn't want to know what was happening behind those barbed wire fences. I think there were some probably that just didn't want to know.
Sure.
And some that believed the propaganda that they heard, negating anything negative, or some that believed the propaganda that they heard that the Jewish people were horrible
Right.
and were being punished, rightly so.
I'm sure.
So they believed that. So they marched 180 miles, 45 days, started out with 2,000 people. And I think it was 200 that ended there, that made it. The last 3 days of this journey were by, again, open cattle car, and they ended in Weimar, Germany. The whole book until this point is in Poland. All these camps were in Poland. They end in Weimar, Germany at Buchenwald concentration camp. And his toes were frostbitten, and he thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have my toes amputated, and I won't be able to work for the Germans. And if I can't work for
They'll
for
kill him.
them,
They'll kill him.
they're
Yeah.
going to kill me.
Yep.
And then he wrote in the book, and the whole tone changes on this one page. And he wrote, I was laying in my barracks, resting in my bed, wondering what will become of me now. And he heard singing. He heard singing. And German Nazi officers coming in, and Jewish prisoners poking at them with the Nazi rifles with bayonets. And he wrote, they must have been wondering, those Nazi soldiers, now what's going to happen? And they were free. Behind them, he said, came the American army. And he wrote, Bruce, and this just amazes me, the American soldiers stood there like giants in their net-covered helmets and camouflage uniforms. He must have had that vision in his brain from that day forward for the rest of his life that he wrote that detail in the book.
Yeah, I've got chill bumps. And not only were they tall and giants, but they were weeping at what they saw.
Absolutely. And if you hear it from their account, sick, because the stench of the sick and the dead bodies everywhere and urine and feces just made them sick. And it's most Holocaust liberation stories include that they would give them food rations and make food, make meals and feed them because they were so emaciated. then they ended up having to take them back because they were so malnourished. If they ate rich food or ate too quickly and their bodies weren't used to it, it could make them so sick it could kill them.
Well, that's one of the stories is, I want you to mention it in a few minutes because I know how the rest of the story, but there was one soldier giving him candy bars.
That's right.
And they had
Pure
to take
chocolate.
And they had to take them from him, but he remembered the guy.
So many years later, he was married and here in America.
Right.
And had gone to a lake with his wife to swim, and there was a man with his wife there who came somehow he connected later to tell this story. He said there was this funny looking small man. I don't know why he said funny looking, but maybe he was looking at him funny.
Right.
Small man with his wife who kept staring at him. He said, I don't know why he was staring at me. He wasn't staring at my wife because he had his own beautiful wife. So that man and his wife were so uncomfortable, they picked up their towels and their chair or whatever and moved. And then he said that the man followed him and said, I know you. You were a soldier at Buchenwald concentration camp. I was there, and you gave me a candy bar to eat, and you took it away.
And they became friends, right, from that.
Right. That's right. How remarkable that he remembered that man. It was like, I don't know, six years later.
It's remarkable that he remembered all the details, but I guess you would. But to remember all these details and document them is absolutely incredible. So let's go back now. He's free, and now talk about him finding his wife and how he came to America. That's an amazing story. And what happened?
Yes,
what happened when he got to America?
Okay, so before he got to America is important. So he was liberated. Later learned that he had lost his family. And the Allied forces gave them time to heal and, gave them food and housing. And so he was living with some guys, and he missed his late teenage years, early 20. He missed fun. I mean, what do teenagers do? They have fun.
Sure.
He missed all that. And so these guys were saying, hey, this is great. We're just going to live on their money. Let's go, drink beer and chase women. And Abe said, you know what? I never finished school. I need to get an education. And so he continued studying electrician, whatever, and, got some education there so that he could hopefully get a job.
And he was in Germany then, right?
He was in Germany.
Right.
In Germany. And ended up meeting a girl. And the story goes that he kept going to her house and asking for her, and whoever answered the door would say she's not available, but he never gave up.
Yes, she said she would never marry him too, right?
Right. So then when she finally went out with him and they started dating, and and she was German and she was Lutheran. So here he had just suffered under
Nazi Germany
for 5.5 years, lost his parents, lost his sisters, aunts, uncles, lost his grandparents. And so he wanted to marry her, and he said he thought that God would understand he deserved happiness. So it's very evident he never gave up his faith. His faith helped him through. And he said something about marrying her, and she told him, what are you, crazy? I'm going to marry somebody tall, blonde, and German. But that didn't stop him. He didn't give up. They just continued to see each other, and eventually she fell in love with him and said, you know what, I do want to marry you. And he had expressed that he could not stay there in Germany and that he wanted to get a path to the United States of America. The American Army had liberated him. That's where he wanted to go and make a life. And he wanted to do it the right way. Through fate, I guess, which happens to be the original name of the book, he was connected with someone who was able to sponsor him, and through a lot of good luck, it went pretty rapidly, and was able to sponsor him to come to the United States. And it's so funny that he neglected to tell this man that he had gotten married. So once he got here and he was in Augusta, Georgia, working for this man, he committed, I think it was a year, to work for him in his business in return for room and board. So when he got here, he said, by the way,
I'm married.
Yeah, the girl that I was dating, Ellie, I married her. So could you bring her too? And apparently the man was furious, but he did and brought her too. So story continues when he fulfilled his commitment for that year, and then his wife came and they were together. He went up and down the main street in Augusta, Broad Street, Augusta, Georgia, and looking for work so that they could live on their own. And he got a job at a place called Agnes Tire Shop, delivering parts on a bicycle. Now, the funny thing, the man that owned the shop, Jack Platzblatt, was Jewish, and his wife, Aggie, where it was named Agnes Tire Shop, was Catholic. So they were also a mixed religious marriage.
Right.
And as he did with everything he did, he was all in. And he worked hard, and he was smart, and he proved himself, and he helped grow the business, and it grew to Agnes Auto Parts. And then eventually in 1955, moved and grew into a wholesale distributor of auto parts. And then Abe and Ellie started, having kids, and had 3 kids. And the oldest son was named Joseph for Abe's dad. His name was Yosef. And the second son was Jack. And he was named for who? Jack Platzblatt, the man that he was working for.
Yep.
Then 6 years later, no more babies came. And then Ellie realized that she was pregnant and ended up having a little girl. And guess who that little girl was? That was me.
Folks, I told you this was an amazing story. Have you been hearing all this? We're talking to the daughter of Abram Korn. This is her parents. The fact that she is here talking to us is an absolute miracle.
That I am grateful for every day.
Oh, my goodness. My goodness. She's lived in Augusta all your life. She's a Georgia Bulldog. She's a great family. These people got some special DNA. They got some special blood going through their veins. But, another thing, Helen, that touched me was when the people that owned the wholesale parts, and I can't remember their names, but
Jack and Agnes.
Jack and Agnes, they passed away, and they left your dad that business. And so he owned this very lucrative business, which he had grown. They had no kids, and he became like their kid, right? Like their son.
So they were our godparents. So my name is Helen Agnes. Helen was for my dad's mom, and then Agnes was for Aggie from Agnes Auto Parts. They built houses across the street from each other, Bruce.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
You're talking about the American dream.
Oh, he achieved the American dream, 100%.
He worked his butt off, and he did it all during this evil that he had to live under, but he also came back to the United States, and he worked hard, he was smart, he was shrewd, and all of a sudden he had this lucrative business and just did well. And then at 49 years of age, he died, and I want you to tell that story, but she ran to his wife, who came from Germany, the German Lutheran from Germany, ran that business, and she did well with it until she died. Am I right?
100%. 100%. She was just as amazing as he was.
Had to be.
It was shocking when he got sick. And my memory, I was 10 and a half years old when he died. And Bruce, I will tell you, he is the best person I have ever known.
Okay,
and the way that we were raised, not because he told us how to be, he showed us how to be. I just get emotional. He led by example.
And so really his story, you didn't really know all about. He didn't talk about that. You had no idea really what he had. You knew he had been in concentration camps,
Right.
but you didn't know this story until later, 20 years after he died, right? When you began to see this manuscript. Am I right?
He talked about it in little bits and pieces. One time I had a spend the night party, and it was 4 or 5 girls, and he had started writing the book, and so he talked to us a little bit about it, but not. It was really just in the beginning, like when they came in and took over their home. He didn't get into any specifics. I mean, we were 9 and 10 years old,
Right.
and I knew what his tattoo meant. But at that age, for me, I didn't really understand it.
Sure.
And I had read his manuscript, but being young, being a teenager, going to college, I can remember, getting it from my mom and letting a college professor read it. Of course, I was moved, but I still didn't really understand the force of it all.
Right. But that was years after he died, when you were at college showing the professor
Right.
that.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But, the dad that I remembered, Bruce, and I talked with my brother about this actually today. I have different memories than my brothers have.
I'm sure.
They were boys. I was a girl.
And they were a little older. Yep.
And they were 6 and 9 years older than me. And I was daddy's little princess.
Sure.
But what I remember is a dad who, when the circus came to town, wouldn't just buy tickets for us. He would buy tickets. Actually, I don't even remember my mom going with us, but she may have. He would get the van from the warehouse. So back then, it's just a van
Right.
with no seats in it because it carried
It was work
inventory.
van. Yeah.
And so he told me I could invite a friend. And so we'd sit back in that van, but he drove out to the Gracewood State School and Hospital out in South Augusta, which was basically a hospital and a sometimes permanent home for mentally challenged children.
Yeah.
These special children would pile in the van with us. Of course, you couldn't do things like that today. But they would pile in the back of the van with us, and then Daddy would head to drive downtown to the circus. My girlfriend was with me cried because this one child next to her wanted to kiss her and hug her all the time. I mean, these children, we know as adults, have very special gifts.
Sure.
But at the time, we didn't understand. But that's what he did.
It was showing who he was again. He's going to people that needed to go to the circus. Yeah.
That's right. So
Yeah.
he was taking them, giving them an opportunity to go to the circus.
Right.
He used to have our Sunday school up for a party at the lake, just like, hey, we invite all the children and their families from the Sunday school up to this picnic at the lake. And he couldn't swim. And I'll never forget, he's on the dock, and there was a child who waded in too deep and got in over his head and was flailing. Now, my dad couldn't swim, and he jumped off the dock to save the child. And then somebody jumped in after him. But I guess he knew he was tall enough once he jumped in to be able to stand and help that child. But he didn't hesitate. And Mom was the same way. As a young adult, when I graduated from college and went to work in the family business, which I had no intention of ever doing, but it's the best thing I've ever done. My mom she would cover the cost for several years in a row on Christmas Day, cover the cost of the food for the soup kitchen, and we would go as a family and serve, because she said Christian people need to have Christmas, so we're Jewish, and we need to serve on Christmas Day so that they can be with their families on Christmas.
Unbelievable.
And these weren't people that talked about what they did. They just did it.
It had a lot to do with what he lived through and what she lived through, and just the DNA. I don't know what. Folks, I want to tell you, she's given some highlights of this book. I highly recommend that you get a copy. It's called Abe's Story. Tell me how to get it.
Okay, there's a couple of ways you can get it.
Okay.
You can go to remember.org,
Okay.
and his picture pops up on the left, and you can click on it, and it'll take you to buy the book, which will send directly to my brother, who edited the book and had it published. His name is Joey Korn, and it's Korn. The book is written by Abram Korn, Korn. Or you can get it from me, and I can give you a phone number or email address either way.
Okay. I want to get your number because I want to talk about something else here. So you go to remember.org, right? Is that what you said?
Right.
Folks,
and there's a link to Abe's story there.
Right. You want to go check that out. This is one of those books that I guarantee you, when you start reading it, you're not going to put it down. As I mentioned earlier, I was been on vacation last week with 16 people under one roof, and I read this book in about two and a half days in the middle of all the chaos. Let me ask you this before I talk about what you're doing in these presentations. What do you think is the most important lesson from your dad's story? Well, there's got to be many, but what jumps out at you that you want to be sure people know, can learn about your dad or from your dad?
Life is a gift. I don't even hesitate when I say that. He valued life. I mean, God gives us life, and we should value it. I wake every day, and usually the first thought,
Right.
Sometimes it's like, I don't want to get up today.
Right.
Or I
Sure.
don't want to get up yet. I don't mean today.
Right.
I don't want to get up yet. But my first thought is, thank you, God, for today. Thank you for my life. Thank you for my parents. And it goes from there. Life isn't always perfect, and it's not always easy.
For sure.
But we need to value our lives, value the people in our lives. And we were brought up saying, I love you.
Same with my family.
And not everybody does that.
For sure.
We were brought up that way. We weren't told to do it. We were just told, I love you, and we said, I love you back. And then we grew up saying it to people that we loved, friends, family. Now we have our own families. Bruce, I did the math today, which is something I had never done before, but I think about it a lot. I just never put the pencil to it. I always say my parents came here, 2 people, with nobody. They came here, 2 people. My mother's family was still living in Germany, but Dad had no family. So they came here, 2 people, and now, looking at us from heaven, they see this great family that they created. So they had 3 kids, and then we married, and we each had kids. Now our kids are starting to have kids, and our family started with 2 people. We are now 32 people. And 1 more on the way, so far.
It will only grow. What a legacy. What a story. My goodness.
I love my parents. And my dad died when I was 10 and a half. He was, I told you, the best person I've ever known. My mom died when I was 23. And again, right up there with him, one of the best people, the 2 best people I've ever known. From the lives they lived and the examples they set.
And what they went through to get to where they are.
To be here.
Yeah, wow.
How do you think my mom's family felt for her to say, hey, I'm marrying this Jewish guy that just spent 5.5 years in concentration camps.
And we're moving to the
but
United
we're
States.
going to move to America.
Yeah. I'm just blown away. I'm telling you, she hit on some highlights of this book. You want to get it. And Helen, you also have, for years, speak to groups. Just talk a little bit about that. And I'm sure there's going to be somebody listening to this that would love to have you come. I know I messed you up and how you normally tell your story. I'm interrupting and talking.
No, it's been great.
Asking questions or whatever. But I know you have a presentation that you do. Just talk about that and talk about how people can get in touch with you and figure out how to get you to come and speak to their group. I think there's going to be people that want to do that.
I love to share my dad's story for many reasons, because it needs to be told. This really happened. And people who read it often share with us that they have a new appreciation of their family. Or people tell me, I never told my parents that I love them, or I didn't tell my children or my friends that I love them. I read this book, now I tell them that I love them. It's just a very inspirational story, besides the fact that it is a real piece of history, and it's very detailed in the things that happened to him and around him. And people need to know, because the survivors are dying out. There are not that many left anymore to actually tell the story. So you can either hear it from a child of a survivor, or you can read about it from their actual stories. And it's important to realize that we are all humans with hearts and feelings, and there's no room for prejudice.
Right.
I mean, we're the United States of America. We're supposed to be the best country in the world and the best place to live. There's no room for prejudice.
And when you say what you said at the beginning, the rise of anti-Semitism, it's scary. We don't want that to ever happen again. I can tell you that. That you get that message.
Absolutely not.
You get that message too. So wow. So how can people get in touch with you to either get the book or to get in touch with you about speaking to a group? I know you have the website abesstory.org, but are there other ways people can get in touch with you?
I love to share. My email address is very old-fashioned. It's helenbiss@aol.com. So it's HELENBISS@AOL.com. And then my phone number is 706-306-5761.
Wherever you are and listen to this in the United States, if you want an unbelievable story and to impact people, get in touch with Helen. She said she's willing to do it. She has to work it out, and you got to figure out how to get her there. But she can do this. So
it's important to share his testimony. He wasn't able to share it verbally. It was too emotionally difficult. Mom said he had terrible nightmares, and once he started actually writing the book, his nightmares stopped.
Well,
so he deserves that, but we all need to know.
Yeah, and you're honoring your parents by telling this story too, and you're honoring the United States of America.
And we say never again.
Never again. God bless you, Helen.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.